Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, June 4th, and today is day 242 since October 7th. You might have noticed this week that I haven't had external meetings. I've been reading a lot. I'm reading Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, and I wanted to share a few words of his. I've also been reading from Alan Bosak's Pharaohs on Both Sides of the Blood Red Waters, and other writings from the anti-apartheid movement. But one of the things Nelson Mandela says in his autobiography, and he says this time and time again, he says over and over again, we'd used all of the non-violent weapons in our arsenal: speeches, deputations, threats, marches, strikes, stayaways, volunteer imprisonment, all to no avail. For whatever we did was met by an iron hand. A freedom fighter learns the hard way that it is the oppressor who defines the nature of the struggle. And it is the oppressed is often then left with no recourse but to use the methods that mirror those of the oppressor. And at a certain point, one can only fight fire with fire. Mandela ultimately came to the conclusion that violent resistance was the only way to end the apartheid regime in South Africa. And I think that's a really important lesson for us at this particular moment in history as we look at the ongoing bombing in Gaza. I think might we learn from the past, and as we seek to respond to the crisis in Gaza, in Israel today, at Churches for Middle East Peace, and we as Christians, we support nonviolence and we worship the Prince of Peace. But for many who are seeking freedom and liberation after decades of repression, many feel like violence is the only way forward. And I think part of our obligation is to seek to give an alternative way forward and to find a way forward towards peace where violence will not be the only answer. So what's happened in the last 24 hours or so? There's been a lot of back and forth on the international front in terms of President Biden's most recent ceasefire hostage negotiation deal. President Biden and the White House are seemingly stepping out of the way in terms of Israel's response, and I think they're kind of waiting to see what Netanyahu and his government will do. There's been no real news in terms of the outcome, but I wanted to give you a few highlights about the conversation. Qatar's foreign minister has said that it delivered Israel's proposal for a ceasefire hostage release deal, whose main points were presented by Joe Biden on Friday to Hamas. The proposal is much closer to the positions of both sides, according to Qatar's foreign ministry. But a senior Hamas official said that the group has frowned on Washington, and the West calls for it to accept the proposal put forward by Biden, as if Hamas is the one who's hampering the deal. So there's been a lot of conversation about, is this Israel's proposal? Is this President Biden's proposal? It's not even certain whether or not Israel accepts the proposal. This is kind of, what we're hearing in the international news. The U.S. wants the UN Security Council to adopt a resolution backing the proposal at the United Nations. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield has said, and France's President Macron spoke today with Netanyahu and expressed his support for the ceasefire and release of hostages presented by President Biden. That's according to French news. And when asked by Time magazine if it's possible that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political considerations, U.S. President Joe Biden said, quote, "There's every reason for people to draw that conclusion," end quote, which was quite profound, for the U.S. to make that kind of a public statement. When asked if Israel had committed war crimes in Gaza, Biden replied, quote, "It's uncertain," end quote. The National Security Council spokesperson Kirby said that Biden was referencing what many critics had said about Netanyahu. He said that the prime minister will speak for himself about his own politics and in response to what critics are saying. So he kind of backed up or backed off of some of those critiques that Biden had said publicly. In terms of what's happening in Gaza, the UN rights chief, Volker Turk, welcomed a ceasefire proposal and said that Israel has brutally violated the norms governing how to conduct the war in Gaza. He said the situation in Gaza is beyond catastrophic. The Israeli Defense Forces have said that they've demolished tunnels that Hamas was using in central Gaza. Hamas reported in the last 24 hours that 8 members of their police force were killed and several civilians have been wounded in an Israeli airstrike in Deir Abalah in Gaza. And the World Central Kitchen has now resumed activities in Gaza. They've said that they've delivered more than 50 million meals. The aid group had suspended their activities after 7 of their volunteers were killed in that airstrike in April. The death toll, according to the health ministry, is 36,550 Palestinians killed, and those wounded is more than 82,959 since October 7th. After 20 hours of battling conflagrations in northern Israel, Fire and Rescue has said they've gained control of the fires that were a result of rocket barrages from Lebanon. So that happened yesterday. Ben-Gvir, the national security minister in Israel, said in response to the fires, "It's now the army's duty to destroy Hezbollah. They're burning our areas. We need to burn all of Hezbollah's strongholds, destroy them, war!" Exclamation mark, end quote. So hostilities have continued between Hezbollah and the Israeli Defense Forces on the northern border. There have been rocket and aerial infiltrations into northern Israel throughout the day today. Hezbollah claimed responsibility for drones that were fired at the Golan Heights. And in an interview with Al Jazeera, Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary Naim Qassem said that the organization does not want to expand the war with Israel, but if Israel chooses a full-out war, they are ready. The Lebanese news agency said that 1 person was killed and another was wounded in Israeli attacks on South Lebanon. A media expert in Israel, his name is Amos Harrell, was quoted in the Haaretz as having said, "There's reason to believe that the 4 hostages whose deaths were reported this past week while in Hamas captivity, it was announced on Monday that 4 hostages had died while in Hamas captivity." And Amos Harrell said that there's reason to believe that they were actually killed by accidental shelling by the Israeli Defense Forces. And he said that buttresses the family's claims that any delay in a ceasefire deal, endangers the lives of the hostages. And I just wanted to make note, that's what I was talking about yesterday, where when we were on the ground in Israel, we kept hearing that reports that were coming out in the news weren't necessarily agreed. Hostage families or others had questions about that. And so this military expert and media person, Amos Harrell, said as much, that there's reason to believe that those 4 deaths happened because of shelling in Gaza. In the West Bank, 2 Palestinians were killed overnight in Tulkarem after they approached a separation barrier. According to reports, they had the aim of firing on adjacent Israeli communities. That's according to reports by the Israeli Defense Forces. Soldiers confiscated the weapons, and those at least 2 members who were approaching the barrier were killed near Tulkarem. And during a visit near Tulkarem, the Defense Minister Gallant said that he ordered the Army and the Defense Ministry to prepare to establish, quote, interference teams in towns and settlements along the Green Line due to escalations happening there. I also have an update from Capitol Hill. We're very grateful to announce, and Churches for Middle East Peace helped support this happening, but a congressional letter was published today that came out from Representative Grijalva, urging the State Department to prevent confiscation of Palestinian lands and further violence in the West Bank. So a Democrat from Arizona, Grijalva, Representatives Jonathan Jackson from Illinois, others, there were several others on this, including Alon Omar, James McGovern, Pramelia Japal Ramirez from Illinois, Jakowski from Illinois, Rashida Tlaib from Michigan, Garcia from Illinois, all urging Secretary of State Antony Blinken to engage with Israeli authorities on the re-registration of the Nasser family farm. So this letter is specifically urging the State Department to prevent the confiscation of Palestinian land, further violence in the West Bank, but it specifically names also the re-registration of the Nasser family farm and the Tent of Nations, which we were just talking about yesterday. So that letter just came out today. So we would encourage you to take that letter, give it to your representatives, ask them to sign on. It says, since the state of Israel declared their farm as state land in 1991, the family has been subjected to what the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem has called a bureaucracy of violence, which has delayed the re-registration of their land as private property for 34 years. My prayer for each of us today is that we would know what role we each might play, individually and corporately as a community, to help bring about efforts towards peace. I've been reading Parker Palmer's Let Your Life Speak, and he talks about vocation, knowing that which God has called us to do. And he says vocation is rooted in the Latin word for voice. It doesn't mean a goal that you pursue. It is a calling that one hears. And before we know, it says, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. And so might we hear God's calling to each of us, a calling towards peace, a calling towards wholeness, a calling towards biblical community, belonging, and common humanity as we seek peace together. In the name of Christ, amen.